The Persnickety Witch of Fiddyment Creek by Gaye Pollinger, Chapter 2. The next morning, Pearl rode by Penelope's house in the usual manner, but slowed ever so slightly as she got to mine and yelled, "Morning, Lucy. Hi, Kathy with a C. Hey there, Jameson," and continued on her way. Jameson clacked and giggled with glee, and Kathy jumped up and down. This old lady who fascinated everyone called my children by name. I could sense Penelope's confused amazement, and I yelled to her, "I'll tell you when we come over." I turned to watch Pearl riding down the street. I wanted to see where she went, how far she went, and exactly when she turned. And then I went inside for some blueberry muffins I had made earlier to take over to Penelope's. "What on earth?" Penelope began as we placed everything on a small wicker table between the chairs. "How did you—" And she stopped again, waiting for my story. She set out small plates, forks and spoons, butter, the mugs for coffee, and cream and sugar. Cookies and sweating metal glasses of Kool-Aid were waiting for Kathy and the boys when they were ready for a snack. Right now, they were busy playing in the yard. And again, Kathy found a porch step where she could see the world pass by and also listen to Penelope's story about the Persnickety Witch. "You are not going to believe this, Penelope," I began excitedly. "Yesterday we all went for a walk and we stopped at the general store and I peeked into the windows. All of a sudden, she was there. I had been so interested in what I could see inside, I never heard her ride up. She already knew who I was. And she said she had known my mother. And then she even told me that her name is Pearl. Pearl." "Pearl what?" asked Penelope flatly. I deflated instantly. "Pearl what?" I repeated to myself. Pickles. I still didn't know her last name. "Pearl Witch" was all I could groan. Just tell me more about her." "Let's see. Where was I? Oh, yes." Penelope blew on the liquid before wrapping her lips around the edge of the mug for a sip of the very hot, freshly percolated coffee, which delayed the storytelling even more. "Michael attended the high school in the next town and helped out at the general store. Sometimes they would sit out on the porch, and she would play her dulcimer, and he played an auto harp. The sounds were beautiful and carried on the breeze into town. People would stop and listen. It was almost magical. In the evenings, he would go out to Will's wood shop and saw and hammer and who knows what else. He was good at whittling, too, so eventually figures and carved animals appeared in the store, and once he whittled an entire circus with a wooden tent and everything. Somebody liked it so much they bought it as fast as a jackrabbit. He had a gift for carving, and his next project was a headboard for the Pearl. I wonder if she still has it," I thought to myself. Honestly, Pearl had a radio at the general store, and folks used to stop in there when they were out and about town to hear the news about the war and Hitler and all those terrible bombings. One day, Michael was gone, and Pearl told everyone that he had joined the army. My mother said Pearl wasn't the same. After all, he was like her son, and she sent him gift boxes filled with socks and cookies and peanut brittle, and she wrote lots of letters with news about Fiddyment. He was good about writing, too, and he told her about the places he'd been and how horrible the war was. People in the area who had boys in the war found out that their letters often didn't get through, or the letters would show up months later. There were spans of time during the war that Pearl didn't hear from Michael, and she didn't know where he was or if he was alive. People would stop in and ask, "Have you heard from Michael?" "Not since the last time you asked, but I will soon," was always her polite response. When Michael came home, he gave her something he had been working on the entire time he was gone, a carving of the Last Supper on a piece of wood he found in Germany, and on the back he etched where he was each time he worked on it. "Oh, I'd truly love to see his work," I said to nobody in particular, but mostly to myself. I must say, at least my mother often told me that Pearl was quite a ruthless businesswoman, and very successful. That came from her being fussy and picky, I guess. Wouldn't put up with shenanigans. Everything had to be just so. Yet she still had a sensitive side. Even taught another woman in a neighboring town how to run a business, and she did quite well. Well, I enjoy these visits, but I have a doctor's appointment and we need to get ready. Tomorrow? Same time? She asked as she stood and began to gather the dishes and put everything in a huge basket. It was close to lunchtime, and back in my kitchen, Kathy was already helping me butter the bread when I asked Jameson if he'd like a grilled cheese sandwich or soup. I already knew the answer, but I wanted to hear him say, sandwich. A sandwich, Money. I cut it into the strips the way he liked, and when Becky finally arrived, I couldn't wait to climb onto her bike and see if I could find where Pearl went each morning. Pedaling down the street, I began to notice that the village of Fiddyment had the potential to be charming, but it was stuck in time. It was typical of many of these smaller towns to have a town square. Fiddyment did, and it had been planned well. There were park benches facing the streets, lots of flowers in the spring and summer, and mums in the early fall, and mature trees gave much-needed shade in the summer. There was also a circular fountain in the middle of the square. People liked to meet there and sit on the edge of the fountain and touch the water with their fingers. Every few minutes, water streamed into the air before falling back into the basin. People often tossed a penny or two and made a wish. Many of the surrounding buildings were built from huge pieces of limestone dug out of a nearby quarry, and the date the building opened was carved onto a cornerstone. There were still several cobblestone side streets. The sidewalks in front of the stores were elevated and had dilapidated hitching posts that had been used to accommodate horses and buggies of days long gone. Empty terracotta containers stood beside the front door of several businesses. It was like the proprietors just didn't care anymore. A chalkboard easel in front of the Old Stone Cafe told passers-by about the Blue Plate Special. Scooper Dooper was still popular because of its homemade ice cream and delicious concoctions. The old popcorn shop was so small that there was barely room to turn around, and the odor of stale popcorn wafted down the street. The Bank of Fiddyment's window sign said that they were open until 3 o'clock. Jack's Sunoco service station had customers at the pumps and a car being worked on in the garage. Roxy Theater was closed until the weekend. Woolworth's Five and Dime had flip-flops and school supplies on sale. We have the usual things to keep a town alive, I thought to myself, but nothing really to draw people for an afternoon of fun and shopping. I pay better attention. I think it was around here where she turned. How many times have I traveled this way and never seen the pathway, almost hidden by the bushes and boughs of a tree on either side? I turned the bike onto the secluded pathway. It was dark and cool, and continued around the bend. I decided to keep on going. I looked up at the bright sky, peeking through the leaves and branches. I felt excited to be on this adventure. I could hear Fiddyment Creek, so I knew I must be riding alongside it. After another curve, the path stopped. There was nothing ahead of me but tangled climbing roses and weeds. I got off the bike, pushed gently on the foliage, and it opened without any trouble. All of the tangled vines and growth disguised a wrought iron fence and gate. Once inside, I thought I had discovered the secret garden that I'd read about. Instead, I realized that I was in an old cemetery, and somebody had done a fine job of gardening. The next thing I noticed was that several of the oldest headstones were crumbling and were barely readable. There were others whose names I recognized, probably from overhearing people talk about Fiddyment's founding families. As I stood and looked from side to side to get my bearings, any fear I had diminished. In the middle of the cemetery was a statue of an angel keeping guard, and there were 3 park benches under trees. An old weather-beaten greenhouse was in the far corner, and it could hardly be seen for the wildflowers growing around it. In another corner was a pump with a long handle to prime the water. Hanging from it, the spigot, was a tin cup. The cemetery was a sanctuary, and even though I was an intruder, I felt safe. Hello, can I help you find anything? A familiar voice asked. I spun around toward the sound, and sure enough, it was Pearl. She stood holding an old straw hat, and a lot of her hair had escaped from the hairpins. I, 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 I stammered. And then I sucked in a big breath and continued. Actually, I watched to see where you turned this morning. I'm just curious, Pearl. But I didn't think this was private. I mean, there's no sign that says that, and it's so peaceful here. Is this where your husband is buried? I answered as I asked a question of my own. Yes, it is, and Michael's father too, she offered. There are 2 headstones here with no wording in them. She walked toward the grassy area and pointed at them with the toe of her red tennis shoe. Pansies surrounded both graves. Willoughby liked the faces on pansies, Pearl told me. I feel like I've known you, I began. Pearl nodded her head and answered, You have. Do you drink hot tea? I nodded my head up and down to answer. Well, come to my place around 7 o'clock this evening. I live in the white cottage on the hill. And leave the children with Thomas, she said. Of course. It'll be good for all of them, I said as I laughed nervously. Stay here as long as you like, but be sure to close the gate when you leave, Pearl told me. She slipped away, climbed onto the bike seat, and rode down the shady pathway toward the street. At home, I began preparing dinner. The children were watching something on television when Tom came home. I kissed him on the cheek and told him that dinner would be ready in an hour. We're having oven-fried chicken, corn on the cob, and mashed potatoes, and gravy, and cucumber salad. How was practice? I asked him. Did Frank ever learn the part? I yelled from the dining room as I set the table. Tom was a science teacher and a band director at Fiddyment High School. The marching band had begun rehearsals called the 3 M's, Meet, Move, and March, right after school got out for the summer, so they were ready for football season. Tom played the trombone and woodwind instruments in high school and college, and he worked hard at encouraging the band members to practice and show up for rehearsals. They were pretty good and had won several county and state competitions under his direction. I could hear water in the bathroom as he took a quick shower. It had been hot today, and he had spent long hours in the sunshine. He came out of the bedroom with his hair tousled, dressed in shorts and a t-shirt and flip-flops, and looked refreshed. Ouch, I said when I glanced at him. You got yourself good and burned. There's some zinc ointment in the medicine chest. He nodded, turned around, and headed for the bathroom. He rejoined me in the kitchen. He had white ointment on his nose. I mashed the potatoes, and he made the gravy. Together we put everything on the table. Come on, kids, he yelled through the house. It's time to eat, and if you don't come now, I'm going to eat everything because I'm good and hungry. We could hear them racing through the house, squealing and yelling, I want a leg, or I want the pulley bone. Jameson grabbed a chicken leg, and his teeth sunk into the delicious crispness. He couldn't quite handle the cob, so I cut off the corn for him. I always liked dinner time. We all talked about our day. Occasionally, I prepared a different type of food, and the kids were good about trying it. We enjoyed teaching the kids etiquette and table manners, and there was a genuine feeling of love, family, and togetherness. Tonight, Kathy was very chatty about Pearl and the story we had been hearing from Penelope. That opened up the conversation for me to tell about the hidden pathway and the cemetery, and then to ask Tom to watch the kids this evening because of my special invitation. But why can't I go too? Kathy whined. Well, Kathleen Aaron McGuire, I'm sure there will be other times that you can go, but this is very special for Mommy, and you and Jameson and I will make popcorn and watch TV together, okay? Tom said, coming to my rescue. Kathy knew that when we used at least 2 of her 3 names, we meant business, and she settled down. I'll just rinse these and take care of them later, I said as I cleared the table. And there's apple pie on the counter and vanilla ice cream in the freezer. I climbed the stairs to our bedroom and stood in my closet looking for something to wear. Hey, did you know I used to deliver Persnickety groceries from Sitter's store when I was in high school? Tom asked from the bedroom doorway. Well, no, you never mentioned it. It didn't seem important, I guess, but I sort of got to know her a little. Man, she has the greatest car. From Great Britain, I think. He turned to go back through the living room and the kids. I decided on a yellow sundress, and I thought I looked pretty nice for my visit with Pearl. I had my hair pulled back in a ponytail with a yellow ribbon at the nape. And as I turned the key in Tom's pride and joy, a 55 candy apple red T-Bird with white leather upholstery and white walled tires, I wondered what waited in store for me. It wasn't a long drive at all, just a few blocks and then up the hill on a long gravel driveway. A Bob White had been sitting on the split rail fence beside the stony driveway, whistling the familiar Bob White, and flew off. My hair blew in the breeze with the top down. I turned off the ignition and began to retie the ribbon when Pearl opened the screen door and waved at me. I got out of the car and walked over toward the gate. It had bells that jingled when the gate opened and closed. The fragrance of roses penetrated my nostril. She had seated herself on a swing and beckoned me up. I guessed that she was about 60. She wore a blueprint dress with lace around the neck's edge. She had her hair rolled up into a French twist, but still a few wisps of it escaped and gently hung beside her ears. She smelled of lavender. Chester, her black cat, lay beside her feet. He opened his green eyes and watched me as I climbed the stairs and then put his head down on his front paws and went back to sleep. Your flowers and garden are just lovely, I said as I got out of the top stair. You certainly have a green thumb, Pearl. I've never seen such healthy Boston fern. It's so big and full. I let my fingers gently touch the pointed leaves. I've had that fern for many a year, Pearl said. It just really seems to like the view from the porch. We're up here away from everything except God. My, just look at that sunset, she said as she moved back and forth in the homemade swing. Some of those colors we'll never see again. I sat in the rocking chair and leaned back. We were both quiet as we watched the sky change colors for several moments. It was full with an explosion of magnificent colors that soon faded to yet another color and looked like bunches of ribbon flung across the heavens. God was an incredible artist with an inconceivable palette. Tea, she said, as she began to pour from a flowered teapot into a matching teacup. The antique set was beautiful. As I put 2 lumps of sugar into my cup, she disappeared into the house, came back with 2 bowls of beach cobbler with a dash of cinnamon and a heavy splash of cream. Your mother used to have tea with me from this very tea set, she commented. My head jerked up. Talk about surprised. My mother? Yes, your mother. Kathleen worked for me at the general store and would come here after we closed just to relax and talk about the day. She was a hard worker, learned fast. She had a head for business, and I was interested in opening a store in another small town, and I wanted her to run it. But her husband didn't like that idea, so I let her run Fiddyment store while I opened up the new one and got it going. She stopped and allowed me to absorb that news. Lucy, do you remember much about your mother? Well, it took me a moment to savor and swallow a mouthful of that peach cobbler before I could answer. Words tumbled out of my mouth. Not a whole lot. I was 4 when she died. I have a picture so I know what she looked like, and every so often I get a whiff of a fragrance that I think she used to wear, but I don't know what it was. And of course I know what people have told me about her through the years, how she liked to sing and wade in the creek and play badminton, and that she was learning to quilt and she adored children. I think I remember stretching out with her on the grass and watching clouds form into shapes, and we made snow angels in the winter. I stopped to reach back into my brain for more memories of my mother. And I remember her being in bed a lot, and she let me brush her hair, and people brought food over, and there was one woman in particular who helped care for her. My eyes squinted as I thought about that memory. My dad didn't seem to like her. I remember that he said mean things to her and that she was entirely too difficult to please, and he called her a witch and told her to get out. And later he told me that that witch woman wouldn't be coming back and I should stop crying. And he said, she is just too persnickety for her own good and we don't need her. Wow, I wonder where that memory came from. Pearl reached over and touched my hand, and it was then I knew that Pearl was that woman. And it was my very own father who inadvertently had named her the Persnickety Witch. Actually, my dear, Pearl began, my married name is Witch, spelled slightly different than what you might think. Witschche. Your father wasn't calling me a witch at all, but a four-year-old little girl didn't understand that, and she referred to me as the Persnickety Witch every time she saw me. Oh, the way you used to say persnickety, it never did come out right. And the older people in town knew the play on words, and they thought that the little girl was very clever. And after all, I am persnickety and stuck in my ways, and I like things done right. It was me? I'm the one who started all that? Oh, Pearl, I'm sorry. And then the humor hit me. I laughed so hard, I thought my sides would split. We both laughed loud and long, and both of us had tears spilling down our cheeks. Chester stretched, stood, rubbed up against our legs, and moved me out to let us know his concern. Oh, my goodness, I said between snorts and giggles. Instead of Persnickety Witch, you are Pearl Witch. One and the same, she said with a huge grin after sipping hot tea. Oh my, I just don't remember that part. The next that I do remember is that my dad left and his sister, Auntie Caroline, came to stay with me. Moved right into our house. She tried, and oh, how she tried to become my mother, and I resisted like crazy. You stayed with me until Aunt Caroline arrived. Slept in Michael's room. You loved that circus that he whittled. I did? I mean, I stayed with you? Gosh, I just don't remember that. I let you have the circus animals after Caroline arrived and settled in, and she wouldn't let you keep them. She came into the general store and threw them on the counter. I came over to your house one day when you were at school and told Caroline that Kathleen had some of my things and I wanted them back. She let me in, and I took your baby book, photo albums, your booties, and many of your baby toys and clothes, the quilt she had started, a dulcimer I'd given her, and many of Mike's whittlings. And I have everything in a trunk inside my house. I didn't know if she would keep those precious things or not, and I was determined to get as much as I could and keep them for you. You have my things? Pictures? Things that my mother made? And Michael's circus? Penelope told me that somebody bought Michael's circus. Yes, somebody did. Her eyes sparkled and got as big as saucers. Me. He asked me if he could sell some of his whittles in the store, and I adored what he had done with the circus, so I bought it. There's a chill in the air. Why don't we go inside? Pearl asked as she got up. Do you like the cobbler? Oh, it's absolutely wonderful. It's your mother's recipe. She was quite the cook and baker. She could bake almost anything. I think I even rescued some of her recipes. The screen door lightly closed behind us, and I entered Pearl's living room.